Welcome back to the Mind Flux channel. Today what we're going to be looking at is using Diva to create a techno bass line. So let's start by loading in Diva. I'm just working with the default. I've created a new Midi clip. Remember, you just double click. I'm going to press play so we can hear what we're doing. I'm going to go into the first octave. I'm just going to add a continuing 16-note rhythm. But what I'm going to do is use the shift up button to utilize the octave above to give it a little bounce. So Command D, shift down, Command D, let's just do something like that and see how it sounds. So let's just keep it playing while we're listening. And to make it a bit more techno, let's utilize the note next to your root note. So I'm just working with A at the moment, so let's say it's A minor. I can also switch the scale on if you want a little help. This is over here on the left hand side in the clip information. Let's do minor because we're doing techno. And this is actually amazing. So if you want to explore any of these other scales, it's really cool to kind of vary it up with your production. So now we can actually see what notes we can play in the scale to make it harmonious or out of the scale to give it a bit more tension. So I'm just going to utilize there, and then let's just shift the last bit. Let's just go to this B. Or C. Let's just do B first. Yeah, it's better. Before we even jump into Diva, let's drop on our Midi velocity effect. And I'm going to have the random just set there. It'll have no effect at the moment until we programming it in, but it will add a lot of cool kind of features. So first off, I would like to use the MS-20, which is called Dual VCO Eco, I guess, or something like that. I'm going to stick with the triangle, give it a bit of body, and then the saw. So let's bring both of those in. So already there, it's a bit raw. So to give it that kind of techno vibe, let's detune the oscillators from each other. Careful you don't go too far. You probably heard there it went a bit out of tune. So a little bit is really nice, especially when we start using the FM from the first oscillator. So now let's set it to mono. I'm going to leave the feedback in, and I'm going to switch to byte, which again is the MS-20. Just it's a bit rawer than the Moog filter. So this is where we can start to utilize our modifications, especially the add. So we're going to leave velocity on, and this is where this will come into play. So velocity plus envelope, so this envelope here, envelope 2, is going to modulate the filter cutoff. And remember, this is a drop-down menu, so if it isn't on add, you can select what modifier or modulation like LFO and envelopes what you want there. So I'm just using add, which is down here. Let's put the random up so we can really hear the changes. So I think at this point I want to use the analog or digital envelopes from the Jupiter or Juno. And let's keep it quite nice and tight so we can really emphasize the pattern of the 16th notes we have. So you can hear that's really random. So that's way too much. So let's pull that back. I normally just leave it at 20. And if you feel like sometimes it dips too low, we can set the output so that it can't go to super low velocity values. Now the resonant on and called peak here on the filter on the MS-20 is lovely. You can get really raw tones with that. What I can do now is in the modification section, you can see there's a resonance modulation. Now, what do I want to add to that? So let's use the multiplier. So I'm going to multiply the adder with the LFO2. And LFO2, I'll just take the delay down. And let's also add that multiplier into there. And then we can start hearing the effect. And I'll do it quite subtly, so it's not super random. Now, I really like the feedback. I would love to have the feedback plus the bite filter for the high pass, but we can only have one. So why you might want to use the feedback is that it's going to take the output of the synth and feed it back before the cutoff or before the filter section. Creates it nice and raw, but I'm going to use the bite. So this is really good if you want to create more lead line bass. So you can actually cut out a lot of the sub. Especially when you use the peak resonance on the filter. Again, this has a modulation on it, which is really nice. So let's use add. And let's try positive or negative, and let's just see what sound we get. Again, if you want a bit more bass, let's just pull that back down. Bear in mind, the peak resonant corresponds to what frequency you're at. So we might not get the exact same sound, so you might need to adjust the peak and the modulation. So now let's bring in the FM. So this has the triangle wave on oscillator 1 modulating the filter cutoff. So you can hear with oscillator 1 down, it's still affecting the FM. So if you want it to be more random, choosing noise is a good option. Smoother, triangle, and then something in between saw or pulse. So I'm just going to pull that down a little bit. We can also add a modification to this. So let's use the multiplier again. So it's sounding nice and evolving, and we're pretty much there for the sound. We can also add, I really like using the chorus, but if it's kind of like a low-end bass, it might spread it out too much. You might be better using a chorus on an auxiliary effect track. I also love the stoned phaser. So let's say you want to use these, but you don't want it to really affect your low end. So what we could do is duplicate the track using pretty much the same settings and set one of the phasers and chorus on to the second one. And this is quite good because then we can actually start adapting some of these settings. For example, I can push these up a little bit. So I'll solo the higher layer. So now let's bring in the bass layer. Let's drop a kick drum in there. So there we have it. We've taken Diva, we've created a nice bass line with the Midi, we've then adapted and looked at ways to get a nice raw techno sound, as well as adding a layer. And this is going to have this kind of ever-evolving kind of vibe, and that's before we've even added any automation or modulation in there. So if you enjoyed this, remember to subscribe. And if you want to get more tips and tricks, check out our website at www.mind-flux.com.